The Terrifying Lies Podcast, with music and stories by Craig Nybo. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Terrifying Lies Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Nybo. Thanks for joining me on this journey to the odd and the unknown, the thrilling and maybe a little chilling. Now, every so often, I get the itch to share something that stands out, something old or new that gets me all fired up. Today, while gearing up for the comedy science fiction tale this season, I remembered a rare gem, a concept album called Flash Fearless versus the Zorg Women. Created in 1975 by a lineup of rock legends, John Entwistle, Keith Moon, Justin Hayward, and my personal favorite, Alice Cooper, among the list. This one takes concept albums to a whole new level. It's got everything. And if you love those rock operas with that 70s vibe, you're in for a treat. Sadly, it's long out of print, but you can still find it on YouTube. I can't recommend it enough. It's groovy, strange, and I think quite a gift. So give it a listen, and let me know if it doesn't take you somewhere wild. Now, on to the show. What do you say? Today's episode is part 2 of a 13-part series. If you haven't caught episode 1 yet, now's the time. Otherwise, you might find yourself scratching your head a little. So, previously on Terrifying Lies, Twana Birch, our young protagonist, witnesses her beloved pop star's tragic murder in a car bombing staged by a former bandmate. The explosion leaves Twana clutching a curious keepsake, a finger blown clear from the singer's hand. Later, she tucks it into a lipstick tube and wears it as a kind of charm. She talks with her brother Butch about a plan to escape poverty and do something meaningful for their mother, who suffers from dementia. And now for part 2 of Bieber's Finger, Rock and Roll and Resurrection. After school, Twana watched television with her ma until Butch came home. She sat on the ratty couch, holding her ma's skeleton hand. She looked over at her mother in the glow of the TV. Her cheeks looked so hollow. Twana remembered when her mother had taken her to the park to push her on the swings. She remembered when Ma had even invited a few nice men over for dinner sometimes. But those days had gone away as her mother's habit had turned into the beast that had taken over both of their lives. Twana thought about the brochure in her sock drawer just up the hall. New Lives Rehab and Counseling Center, the brochure read in big red type on its cover, next to a logo that looked like a golden snake crawling up a crucifix. Twana wanted to help her ma, but help didn't come cheap. She looked at the brochure many times with dreamy eyes, but at over $8,000 per day for the residence program, she could never hope to admit her. Twana brought the lipstick case out from her collar and looked at it in the glow of the television light. Bieber's finger floated in a bath of formaldehyde. In the severed finger, Twana found hope. Even when she had first found the finger, the concert venue, an idea had formed in her head. She had been working on that idea ever since. Now, that idea had begun to shape into a plan. It all rested on Bieber's finger and on Butch, her deadbeat brother. As if on cue, Butch came through the front door carrying a large brown paper bag.
"Hey, sis,"
he said. He placed the bag on the Formica kitchen table, reached inside and brought out a cigar box. He opened it up and pointed a stash of loose, small bills inside.
"Looks like we're gonna make rent with some to spare this month. No problem."
Twana rolled her eyes.
"I've been down to Second Spin Records. I got you some special issue discs."
Butch said, taking a half-dozen discs out of the bag.
"I got Bieber's whole collection, plus one from that boy band of his. They call themselves the Five Fingers, and they're all autographed."
Twana shrugged.
"And look, sis,"
Butch said, taking a couple of small boxes out of the bag. He held them up and smiled.
"Perfume for you and the other lady of my life. I got you one called Passion Play. Smells real nice. I even had the lady with the lab coat down at the department store put some on my wrist so I could take a sniff."
When Twana didn't say anything, Butch lost a little of his enthusiasm. He held up the other box.
"And for Ma, I got something real expensive. You know, only the best for Ma. It's called Freedom Breeze. I thought it might go real nice when she starts inviting her guy friends over again.
That was all Twana could take. She stood up from the couch and walked into the dining area. Butch recoiled from her as she came at him. She took the bottle of Freedom Breeze from him and waved it in his face.
You think Ma's got any use for perfume?
Butch shrugged.
Look at her.
Twana gestured over her shoulder. Butch looked at the back of his ma's head. Her hair had started falling out, hung in greasy strands, clumped and unkempt.
She's a junkie, Butch. Probably buying her smack from your boss.
Butch raised a hand defensively.
Hey, I ain't never dealt no drugs, you know that.
I don't know what you do and what you don't do out there. Why isn't you gotta come home every few nights with small bills and a cigar box?
Twana said, picking up a handful of singles and crushing them in her fist.
This isn't real money.
It spends like real money,
Butch said, rubbing a hand up through the back of his hair.
When you come home with this money, it only means that somebody on the other end is hurting. Because they lost it to you somehow, Butchie.
What can I do? We gotta survive, sis.
Twana indicated the dumpy flat by spreading her arms, making sure that Butch took in the entirety of the shoebox in which they lived.
Look around. This ain't surviving. This is dying real slow.
Hey, come on, I'm doing the best I can.
And as for guiding real slow,
Twana walked to her mother. She rested a hand on one of her bony shoulders and looked back at Butch. He looked away.
look at her.
Butch's eyes snapped up.
Come round here so you can see her real good,
Twana said. Butch moved sheepishly around the couch so he could see his mother's face, drawn and haggard. She looked up at him, then let her eyes loll shut.
She's gonna die, Butchie, unless we help her somehow.
Butch shrugged.
What do you want me to do?
I'll tell you what I want you to do.
Twana said. She moved out of the living room down the short hallway to her room. Butch shrugged and followed her. When he entered her room, she was standing at her dresser. She opened the top drawer and took out a sheaf of newspaper articles she'd collected.
Sit out.
Twana pointed at her bed. The bed springs creaked as Butch sat. Twana tossed the sheaf of newspaper tear sheets into her brother's lap, picked them up, and read a few of the headlines. They were all about Orlando DiPescio. A scrabble of nervous energy crawled up Butch's spine as he looked through the papers.
You don't want to go messing around with this guy. He's dangerous.
He's your boss, isn't he? He's the reason you always come home with split knuckles and black eyes, isn't he? What is it he has you do for him, Butchie? Are you one of his hammers?
This isn't your business,
Butch said, putting the tear sheets down on the bed next to him.
Pick those back up and read the first 3 headlines.
Butch hesitated. Twana put her hands on her hips and pursed her lips. Butch picked them up. The first headline read, Biologist question regarding illegal cloning. He flipped to the second article. Its headline read, Suspected underground cloning clinic busted, but found empty. He flipped to the third article. Its headline read, DiPescio thug squeals on organized crime and cloning. Butch looked up at his sister, his eyebrows arched.
I don't get it. This doesn't have nothing to do with nothing.
Twana reached under her collar and drew out the lipstick case. She took it off and dangled it in the air. Butch looked up at the odd pennant and shrugged. She tossed it at him. Butch caught the pennant and held it up in the light. When he recognized what was in the lipstick case, he gasped and dropped it on the floor.
What in the name of...
It's Bieber's,
Twana said. She bent down to pick up the lipstick case.
I found it after the explosion.
What are you doing with it?
Butch asked.
Dear Lord, my sis has gone psychotic.
Butch crossed himself and pulled his feet up onto the bed. Twana held the lipstick case in Butch's face. He cowered away from it as she waved it right in front of his eyes.
It's time for you to man up, big brother. Our ma's gonna die if we can't get her some kind of help. And if you don't believe it, you're living with your head shoved in a hole. This is the key, and your boss is the door.
At that instant, the whole weight of what she was asking sank in. He pushed the lipstick case away and stood up from the bed.
Oh no, sis. Oh no. You're thinking crazy. The kind of crazy that'll get us all killed.
You got no choice,
Twana said.
You're wrong. I've always got a choice.
Butch crossed the room toward the door. But just before he left Twana alone, she spoke up.
I got details, Butchie. I know where you go. I know what you do. I know who you beat up and who you collect from. I know names of cops who your boss pays off.
Butch stopped at the door and let his shoulders slump.
I do it all for you and Ma.
You do it all for you, Butchie. At least that's the way it was in the beginning. The fast cars, the expensive suits. Only I haven't seen those cars or suits in a long time. It's about time you recognize that your boss is all about your boss.
Butch turned slowly and faced his sister.
Whatever you got in your mind, you'd best drop it. You're right about DePescio. He only cares about himself. You go playing in his backyard and he'll shoot you down like a mongrel pup.
All you gotta do is get me in front of him. I'll do the rest.
Sis, you don't know these people.
Butchie, I gotta do this thing. It's my last idea to help Ma. She's all I got.
You got me?
Bless you, Butchie. But someday Ma and I are gonna answer the door and there's gonna be a cop there. And he's gonna tell us that he found you in some gutter or floating face up in the canal. You gotta help me with this one thing.
Sis!
If you don't, I swear, I'm gonna go to the cops and the newsmen and tell them everything. I'm gonna make sure DePescio knows that it was your little sis who is the rat.
He'll kill you,
Butch said, spreading his hands expressively.
Nope. You'll kill me. He might pull the trigger, but it'll be you who knows that you didn't give me my one chance to help Ma.
Butch paced back and forth across the room. He tried for another half hour to argue with her, but he knew once Twana made up her mind about something, no matter how crazy that something was, she would never let it go. In the end, he agreed to get her in front of Orlando DePescio, but in the back of his mind, he was certain that neither he nor his sister would live through whatever it was she had in mind. Butch and Twana sat across the street from Edward Ching's dive bomb of a Chinese restaurant on the western fringe of town. Few patrons visited Edward Ching's, and when they tried the awful egg foo young or the lousy kung pao pork, they rarely returned. It was because the real owner of Edward Ching's, a gangster named Orlando DePescio, didn't want patrons to like the food. Edward Ching's made DePescio plenty of money, but not by serving first-class Chinese cuisine. Of course, for the right patrons, the skeleton crew of cooks could whip up something brilliant. Two muscular men dressed in almost identical black suits stood outside the entrance to the Chinese restaurant. The neon glow from the luminescent dragon marquee washed down on them in orange and pink. Both men wore dark glasses even though the sun had gone down at least an hour ago. They took more than a little notice of Butch's rattletrap car parked across the street. One of the bruisers put a hand beneath his lapel. The other looked up and down the street, scanning for possible witnesses.
You have to do exactly what I say,
Butch said. Twana bit the tip of her little finger as she looked at the nondescript restaurant.
These guys don't mess around.
Just get me in there and let me talk to him.
Butch fixed her with a stern expression.
Twana, you can't go spewing off at this guy. He's not me. If you rub him the wrong way, he's liable to hurt you real bad.
I know what I'm doing.
Twana said, rolling her eyes. Butch ran his fingers through his hair and took a deep breath. He looked out the window at the two guards. He didn't know their names, but he ran into them regularly when he brought numbers or parcels to Edward Chang's.
Stay here,
he said, and got out of the car. The two iron-jawed toughs watched Butch cross the street. He ambled to them, hands out where they could be seen.
Who's the skirt?
One of the guards asked. Butch swallowed hard. Here goes.
Either you guys have family, brothers, sisters?
Who is she?
The guard asked again.
Goes like this, you see. She's my sister, and she's got this crazy idea that she wants to see DePescio. I tried to tell her she's not thinking straight, but she's set on...
What's her business?
The bruiser asked. The other guard tightened his grip on something hidden beneath his lapel.
My ma's sick,
Butch said.
Looks like she might be dying. My sis, she has a good heart. She's doing everything she can. She has an idea that might save her, but I guess it involves DePescio. I got no idea what she has in mind, but I told her I'd try to get her in.
The two bruisers stood hard, like they were hewn from stone. They considered Butch's proposal for a silent moment. After a beat, the one who had been doing all the talking finally spoke up.
Bring the girl inside. I'll have a word with the boss.
Butch waved Twana out of the car. She crossed the street. Just before she and Butch entered the big red doors of the restaurant, she reached up and touched the little lipstick case at her chest. Twana and Butch waited in the foyer outside the dining room. One of the guards stayed behind while the other went to talk to DiPescio. Twana looked over the big man. His muscle-bound arms filled out the suit nicely. His face, chiseled to tone perfection, looked like it belonged on the cover of GQ. But something seemed off. Although all the parts were in place, she found him all in all too perfect to be attractive. The guard looked like he had been built for one purpose: punching. The other guard pushed open the dining room door and entered the foyer.
The boss, he's confused as to why you would want to bring your sister to see him. He doesn't understand why you might want to compromise this reputable establishment by allowing an outsider to breach its sanctimonious walls.
Twana scoffed.
It's like this,
Butch said.
She's my sister. Don't you have a sister? Doesn't the boss have a sister? I mean, what am I supposed to do when she comes to me crying?
Butch left out the part about Twana blackmailing him with the threat of blowing the whistle on what she knew about DiPescio, which was, to Butch's regret, quite a lot of information. The guard issued an impatient sigh.
You got 10 minutes,
he said and stepped aside. Butch swallowed and offered Twana a hand. She glanced at his hand and shot him an "Are you serious?" expression. Butch dropped his hand, swallowed again, and pulled the dining room doors open. Orlando DiPescio sat in a corner booth with his back to the wall. A plate of Kung Pao pork and a beer sat in front of him. He looked up from his meal as Butch and Twana made their way across the dining room.
Hello, Butchie.
DiPescio smiled, a long curve of a grin that had a way of terrifying Butch.
I ask you to bring me the numbers, and you come to me asking for favors.
Butch and Twana stepped up next to DiPescio's booth. Butch stared at the ground. Twana looked DiPescio right in the eye. DiPescio looked Twana over. She was the spitting image of Butch, only with long hair and a few years less life experience. She had an intensity about her that DiPescio had learned to recognize in people who were angry or desperate.
And what's your name, little girl?
DiPescio asked, pushing his plate away.
Name's Twana. I'm Butch's sister.
Your brother does a lot for me, and I appreciate it. He runs a few errands, does a little house cleaning. Most of all, he keeps his mouth shut about my business. Don't you, Butch?
Butch nodded but kept his eyes on the ground.
You ought to show some respect and look at me when I'm talking to you.
Butch looked up from the ground into DiPescio's eyes. He felt a lump rise in his throat.
What can I do you for, little girl?
My name isn't Little Girl.
DiPescio chuckled. Butch felt every chortle like a nail driving into his coffin. Maybe he should have refused to bring Twana to DiPescio and let the chips fall where they may. Twana went on.
I have a proposition that I think might be extremely lucrative, but only to a man with the right resources.
DiPescio raised an eyebrow.
Oh? And what kind of resources are you referring to?
I'm not a complete idiot, Mr. DiPescio.
Twana said.
I watch the news. I read the papers.
I see.
DiPescio nodded toward the dining room entrance, where one of the guards stood. The guard nodded back, began crossing the room toward DiPescio's table. Butch whimpered.
Before you sick your pit bull on us,
Twana went on.
you should hear what I have to say. I'm not talking about chicken scratch here. Talking about millions of dollars in residual income by granting you control over a single asset.
DiPescio frowned and raised a hand. The guard stopped where he was.
Just because I have a sense of humor,
DiPescio said.
I'm going to hear you out.
Twana took a deep breath. She'd practiced her pitch in the mirror countless times. She cleared her throat and went into it.
Have you ever heard of Bieber?
DiPescio blinked and shook his head.
What are you talking about?
Don't tell me you haven't heard of him. He's the only person who makes the papers more than you.
Butch winced.
Yeah, That Pop-Tart brat with the songs and the pelvic thrusting that kids today call dancing. Sure, I heard of him. What's that got to do with anything else?
As you probably know, Bieber made the news recently.
DePetio balked.
Kid, I had nothing to do with it. I'm a businessman. Car bombings aren't my style.
Take it easy.
Twana said.
I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I just want to make a deal.
DePetio shrugged.
Okay, kid, go on.
Let me paint a picture for you. What if Bieber didn't die in the accident? What if the whole thing was a hoax, a publicity stunt? What if Bieber was still alive and, even more importantly, willing to sign the rights of his future albums and live performances over to you?
I ain't no record producer.
Bieber's first album sold over 8 million copies. His second, Love and Rocks, did more than triple that. Bieber's estate is worth nearly $1 billion. He's a money machine, and it can be yours.
DePetio smirked.
It sounds all well and good, but there's one catch. Bieber's dead, blown to 1 million bits.
Twana removed the chain and lipstick case from her neck and tossed it onto DePetio's table. It landed next to his plate of Kung Pao pork. The guard in the back of the room drew a pistol from beneath his lapel and aimed at Twana. DePetio raised a hand, indicating for the guard to put away his heat. The guard complied. DePetio picked up the lipstick case and examined it. When he recognized what was stuffed inside, his lips peeled back into that smile that had a way of terrifying Butch.
Oh, Butchie, I'm beginning to like your sister.
It's Bieber's. I was there. I caught it like a piece of candy at a parade.
Twana said. DePetio grinned.
Well, makes a nice souvenir, but it don't mean much to me.
Come on, Mr. DePetio, don't make me spell it out for you.
DePetio put the lipstick case down on the table and steepled his fingers in front of his face. He fixed Twana with an amused expression.
Why don't you indulge me? Spell it out.
Bieber isn't the only one making the news these days.
Twana said.
Everybody knows about your less than ethical pharmaceutical endeavors.
DePetio spread his hands expressively.
Enlighten me.
You've been running a black market cloning ring. For the right price, you've been printing copies of the rich and famous for the rich and famous.
DePetio stroked his chin and considered his next words carefully.
Them reporters, they say a lot of things. Can't believe everything you read in the papers. Truth is, I run a legitimate business, making deals with good, honest people, even if I had the resources to do what you're proposing.
DePetio glanced at the lipstick case.
All I would have was a copy. It's not the body with the magic. It's the mind, the memories, the experience. Copy can't sing. A copy can't dance.
That's why you need me.
Twana took a step toward DePetio's table. The guard at the back of the room flinched. DePetio raised his hand again, ordering the guard to stand down. Twana went on.
I know everything there is to know about Bieber. I can teach him all the moves. I can teach him how to walk, talk, and croon like Bieber.
DePetio looked Twana up and down. She stood tough, unflinching in his glare. He looked at the lipstick case, standing upright on the table next to his meal. He looked back at Twana, tossing her proposal back and forth in his mind.
How old are you, kid?
15.
Twana said.
I was 12 when I first started in the business.
DePetio said, more to himself than to Twana or Butch. He picked up the lipstick case and dangled it in front of his face. It turned in the crimson light of the Chinese restaurant.
When's Bieber's birthday?
August 12th.
Twana said.
Biggest hit?
Stand.
Name 3 of Bieber's dance moves.
The Funky Monkey, the Warrior, and the Icebreaker.
Favorite breakfast?
Cheese omelet, ham, red bell peppers and onions, white toast, 1 slice, toasted on one side, no butter.
Distinctive features?
Birthmark shaped like a heart on his left ring finger. The finger in the lipstick case in front of you.
DePetio squinted and examined the finger floating in its formaldehyde bath.
Well, I'll be,
he said, as he spotted the heart-shaped birthmark.
I have to say I am impressed. But this is a risky deal. Bieber's dead, Bieber's not dead. How are people going to react?
We have one shot at this,
Twana said, putting a hand on the edge of DePetio's table.
Bieber's been booked to play the biggest show in the universe, the Pan-Galactic Prom Show. He's the first human act in history not only to appear at the event, but to headline the show. It makes sense. that Bieber's PR people might try something big for such a landmark moment in his career. They might even fake his death and have him show up at the Pan-Galactic Prom Show fresh and new, back from the dead. Imagine the buzz that will result from such a publicity stunt.
DePetio smiled and rolled a finger forward, indicating for her to go on.
Think of this. Bieber gets out of his old contract by dying, but then, raised from the dead, he hits the scene bigger than ever, singing with a new label, your label. Nobody questions him because your PR people have created a bulletproof cover story, made the whole affair out to be a publicity stunt. Everybody buys it because he's the real McCoy. Bieber, in the flesh. He knows all the songs, he knows all the moves. You can't copy that. As you said, you can't clone singing and dancing.
So let me get this straight.
DePetio said, holding up the lipstick case.
I take this finger and I make a new Bieber. I turn him over to you for Bieber training. You keep it all quiet. I get my people to paint a pretty picture for the press. They sign Bieber into my books and pick up the royalties for his future albums.
That's right. But there's one more condition.
What's that?
DePetio inclined his head forward.
You gotta save my ma. She's real sick. She's a junkie and she's gonna die unless you get her help. I want to send her here.
Twana brought a brochure out of her purse and tossed it on the table in front of DePetio. The cover read New Lives Rehab and Counseling Center in bold lettering. DePetio picked up the leaflet, browsed through it, glancing at the pictures and reading a few of the headlines.
This looks like a real classy joint. Sorry about your ma.
He put the brochure on the table and interwove his fingers. He rested his hands on the formica and looked over at Butch.
You got a firecracker of a sis here, Butchie. I don't know who I should have working for me more, you or her.
Butch forced an awkward smile. DePetio turned to Twana.
When is this Pan-Galactic Prom Show?
In 2 months. I'll need Bieber and 2 tickets to get there via space bus on the quick, or the whole deal collapses.
DePetio leaned back in his booth. He stroked his chin and looked off into the darkness of the restaurant. He picked up the brochure and looked through it again. He picked up the lipstick case and held it to the light so he could get a better look at the finger. Finally, he looked at Twana.
I'm gonna make this deal with you. Not for the money, and not for the prestige of having the world's biggest Pop-Tart in my pocket. I'm doing it because I too love my ma, and I understand what it means to lose her.
Twana smiled. Butch breathed a sigh of relief. DePetio held up the brochure.
Lewis,
The thug across the dining room perked up.
make a call to the New Lives Rehab and Counseling Center. Tell them that they have a new resident.
Twana rubbed her hands together and bounced a couple of times on the balls of her feet.
Here's my condition.
DePetio said, his demeanor going decisively dark.
If you say even one word about me or my involvement in this thing to anyone, you, your brother, your ma, will all become subject to terrible accidents. Am I clear?
Twana nodded.
Good. Then we have a deal.
DePetio used a red napkin to wipe the last traces of Kung Pao pork from his fingers and extended a hand. Twana reached out, and the two of them shook.
Where we belong. Shuffle your feet right on the street. Let your hips sway, baby, that's the way. It's blissful fixins' when you're moving this way. Plug in your center into the universe. Let the current flow through you. The groove is moving you, music behooving you to keep your feet and to feel new. Feeling that groove coming in me, starting to move. And then I wave you along, I'm in the mood. Come on baby, get in the groove. This is where we belong. Put your hands up, turn the sound up. Shuffle your feet right on the street. Let your hips sway, baby, that's the way. It's blissful fixins' when you're moving this way. If you ever get a chance, don't forget to dance. The music's in your soul. Come on, baby, it's time to roll. Put your hands up, turn the sound up. Shuffle your feet right on the street. Let your hips sway, baby, that's the way. It's blissful fixins' when you're moving this way. Put your hands up, turn the sound up. Shuffle your feet right on the street. Let your hips sway, baby, that's the way. It's blissful fixins' when you're moving this way, moving this way.
The song you just heard is called Blissful Fixins'. Like last week's tune, I composed it for an album inspired by a board game called Chops. You can snag a copy over at craignibo.com in the store. I imagine this song coming from a fictional band called Candy Pop, which appears in the game. I felt it was perfect for today's episode. It's the kind of tune you might imagine the fictional band The Five Fingers putting out, or maybe even our character, Bieber. Now, mind you, there's no connection to any real-life celebrity here. We're just deep into storyland with this one. That was Blissful Fixins'. Once again, thank you for being here, for stepping into this strange world of stories, mystery, and adventure with me. I think of each one of you as my friend. If I could, I'd invite you all over for a backyard barbecue, where we'd swap stories and chat about all the prospects lighting up your life. I hope you'll come back and join me next time. Until then, I bid you sweet dreams. Or should I say, sweet nightmares.
This has been the Terrifying Lies Podcast. Please come again. You're welcome here.